I appreciate everyone joining today. I'm Kimberly Sparks, and I'm a senior professional lines underwriter and broker with Chris-Leef. And I wanted to thank you today for joining this very short seminar today on selling cyber. Let's go ahead and jump into cyber breach. Cyber breach is often cited as the number one business risk to modern business today. And it is estimated that less than 30% of U.S. businesses today even purchase a standalone cyber policy to protect their intangible assets. What are those intangible assets? I like to include that in their data, their customer information, the finances that they have access to, their technology assets, such as all the data that's on their computer equipment, laptops, cell phones, and servers. In most cases, these intangible assets go uninsured, even though most businesses can't operate today without accessing their technology. So before I go any further, for full disclosure, we are not going through an entire cyber policy today. We will soon be releasing a 2-hour cyber training course that provides CE credits for you, and that course will take a deep dive into a cyber policy. But since our time is so limited today, we really wanted to focus on one of the most important coverages in a standalone cyber policy. And I believe the primary reason your customer should purchase this coverage, and hopefully help you sell more of these policies. So today we're going to discuss identifying what your business exposures are. And by identifying these exposures, we can show your client why they need a cyber policy and hopefully purchase one. The most important coverage on a cyber policy, drum roll please, is the privacy breach response costs. And we will spend most of our time discussing this coverage today. We will also talk about overcoming common objections and hopefully have some good suggestions on how to combat those objections. And finally, how can we minimize or eliminate some of our agency E&O exposures by offering cyber to our clients today? After this presentation, Megan will email some information back out to you, and it will also include a lot of this information we're going to be discussing, so you don't have to worry about taking notes today. So starting with identifying business exposures, even though this presentation is how to sell cyber, part of selling this product is really understanding what potential vulnerabilities businesses have so you can decide if they really would benefit from a cyber policy. The first area to understand is the data asset and the access to data and storage. This is important because every state has their own privacy breach law that defines what personally identifiable information is. And your client may not understand that the data that they are acquiring is protected legally. So here's a few questions you can ask your client to better understand their exposure. Do they collect information that could be considered private? This question is so important so we can find out where and how they get their data and what they do with it. Many times we see a customer will tell us they do not store or collect anything. So in order to really find out if that is true or not, we ask a few more probing questions, such as, how do you access your emails? Is it on a PC, a laptop? Do they use their cell phone? Or even do their employees use their own cell phone devices? If they have employees, where is their HR information stored? This can include social security numbers, addresses, bank account information for their paychecks, and even medical history. Do they have customer or business information? For example, how do they contact their customers? Do they store names, addresses, email addresses, which they use to communicate with their customers? If it is a B2B organization, a business to business, do they sign any contracts that contain hold harmless or indemnification wording requiring them to protect that business information. This can include many times customer lists, design plans, expiration dates, financial information. And just for a quick example, if you're an insurance agency owner, you have probably signed a contract with an insurance company, and that contract will contain language that requires you to protect any of the company information if there is a breach event. So that is no different than any other organization. Does the business share private information with any third-party vendors? A third-party vendor can include payment processors, bookkeepers, CPAs, attorneys, the cloud, and then also outsourced IT professionals. This question is very important because the business is legally liable to protect this data and can be fined and penalized for a breach event, even if the breach happens on a vendor's network. This is because the data owner is always legally responsible for their data in the care, custody, and control of others. And at minimum, they would be at least required to notify and provide credit monitoring by any affected customers if that data was compromised. The second section we use to identify a business exposure is payment processing. Do they wire transfer funds to pay their bills or accept ACH or credit cards from their customers? Electronic payments are quickly becoming the most common ways businesses are transacting business today, and cybercrime is becoming one of the fastest growing cyber claims that are hitting businesses through social media. If your business is a retail operation, they're most likely utilizing a POS machine or accepting credit cards online through links on a website or even through a third-party payment processor. Many businesses think they are protected by that payment processor or a bank if a breach occurs involving a credit card. But they really need to go back and read their merchant service agreement with their bank or their processor. That contract may say the processor assumes liability if something happens on their end, but many breaches occur on the business side of the internet line, leaving them very vulnerable to lawsuits and PCI fines. And PCI stands for the payment card industry, which sets very stringent security standards when you process credit cards. Finally is business interruption. This is the last area we'll just touch on briefly, but most of you know a commercial property policy often covers income loss if the business is interrupted because of a covered peril or event that impacts the business physically in some way. But the property policy is not designed to cover a business interruption claim from a cyber breach. And that's where the business is not physically impacted, most likely, but you are unable to operate because you have no access to your computers or your network. So good questions to ask is what happens to that business if they can't access their data or service their customers? Have they even thought about it? Do they have a plan? How long can their business survive if they've been shut down by a cyber breach? 1 day, 3 days, a week, a month? Do they have the finance resources to pay their employees while not being able to generate income? And does your customer even have a documented contingency plan in place? And where do they keep it? Many times we find they have it stored on their computer, but that doesn't do much good if you can't get into them. So make sure they have printed copies. And then see if they've even reviewed that contingency plan in the last year. Do they have a way to contact their employees or their customers or their vendors if they've been shut down? If they don't have a plan, they really need to get a plan in place, whether they buy a cyber policy or not. So this is my favorite part, is the most important cyber coverage, and that is the privacy breach response costs, in my opinion. Did you know that cyber coverage is a form of a crime policy? It really is, and this is how I personally sell it. If a business is impacted by a cyber breach or a ransomware virus, they are a victim of a crime. And unfortunately, cyber criminals are rarely found, arrested, or even punished for their crimes. So a business really doesn't have anyone they can go back to try to recoup these costs. Cybercrime Magazine says approximately 60% of small companies close within the first 6 months of experiencing a cyber breach event, and that is so sad. Selling this one coverage alone on a cyber policy could make the difference of that business staying in business or closing their doors. And regardless of the size or the type of the cyber attack, that business will have the same expenses to pay within the first days and weeks and months, whether they have a policy in force or not. So this is very important to know. So the first coverage that is paid for under the privacy breach costs is a breach attorney. This attorney specializes solely in cyber and data breach events. They will review the insured's contracts to determine if they have any legal liability. They will also notify regulatory agencies if required. And most importantly, the breach attorney will coordinate the entire breach response process, so you're not having to contract with multiple vendors. The second is the policy will pay to hire a forensic technology professional. The breach attorney has these IT forensic professionals on staff, and they will be dispensed to either your physical place, or they do things online. They can analyze your network to determine the type and the scope of that breach, and also assist with fixing or patching your network. They also determine what data was compromised, and they will assist you in recreating that data either from backup tapes or from other sources. Notification costs. If personally identifiable information was impacted in the breach, the business will be required to notify the affected individuals. A vendor will be hired that specializes in notification and will manage the entire process so it meets all the law requirements in each and every state. Then most states require that 1 year of credit monitoring identity repair is provided to affected individuals, and that is also covered under this coverage grant. And finally, public relations and crisis management. The attorney will help send out a PR person to help manage the whole situation, try to create the business messaging, downplay the event, try to alleviate any negative news reports or anything that gets online that may impact the reputation of the company. What's also great is the privacy breach costs that I've explained above are covered by most every standalone cyber policy and every cyber carrier for that fact. Some carriers will even pay $1 million limit for the breach response cost outside the limits. So this keeps the policy limits from eroding, and that all the other coverages that are provided on that cyber policy will still be in play. Now, I'm just going to open up the chat just real quick right here. Does anyone have a question about privacy breach response costs or have any questions that I can answer?
Any questions that you have, you guys can throw in the chat for Kimberly so that we can get those answers. We'll be sure to address those as we go through. But I think this is such a good an important part of your presentation, Kimberly, just because this is really the difference between when our agents here are talking to an insured or to one of their customers who say, I don't really think that I need that. Well, this is how you sell this policy to them, to say, if it were to happen, and we hope it never does, look at everything that you are going to have other people to help you with. You're going to have professionals to help you with. And I think that's so wonderful. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, which usually just means you explained it perfectly.
So. Okay. Well, great. So we'll move on to overcoming objections. Now, these are some of the most common objections we hear every day. And the first one is we're too small, or we're not collecting any sensitive data. Some businesses think they're too small to be a target for a hacker. However, that's really just not the case. In 2023, 46% of all cyber breaches impacted companies with fewer than 1,000 employees. And employees of small businesses experienced 350% more social engineering attacks than larger companies, according to strongdm.com. Hackers sometimes see smaller businesses as gateways to larger organizations because smaller companies may not have as sophisticated network security or training as a larger company may have. Now, I always gravitate for an example of this to the Target breach, and I know this happened eons ago, but it's a good example of how this very situation helps. The Target breach was caused by a small VAC contractor that Target had contracted with, and actually a phishing email was clicked on and a malware virus downloaded on that VHC contractor's web network system. And they determined that they had a contract with a Target and were able to breach the Target network and get in. And eventually those hackers were able to get into Target's credit card machines, and then they put a virus on those POS machines, and then every time a credit card was swiped at Target, a copy of that went to the payment processor, and a copy of that went to the dark web, to a ghost server. And I can't even tell you how many millions and millions of people were impacted by that breach. And it was simply because a small company did not have the technology as the larger company. So that is a bad objection to this. A business may also not think or know that they're collecting sensitive data. But after we ask those probing questions that we spoke about earlier, we usually find out they do have protected data, but they were just simply unaware that this data was protected, and many times because it came via an email. The next objection that we hear many times is we outsource our IT to a third party, so we don't have an exposure. And unfortunately, using an outsourced IT provider does not eliminate your exposure, because IT firms, data hosts, cloud providers, they can also suffer a cyber attack. And if that happens, the business will at minimum be legally responsible to provide notification and credit monitoring to all the affected individuals impacted by that breach. The IT firm is only obligated to notify you. What's more, many businesses rely on critical business applications and platforms to function. For example, last Friday, CrowdStrike and Microsoft was impacted by a faulty software update, which took down airlines, banks, 911 systems, and thousands of other companies using their products. Now, it hasn't been 100% determined that that was an actual cyber attack event. However, it does help you see how a business can be shut down when a third-party service IT provider experiences a system failure. We also like to remind our customers that when they sign a contract with a third-party service provider, those standard terms of service usually limit their liability to fees paid if there is a breach or a system outage causing financial harm to one of their customers. So having your own cyber policy benefits you for many reasons. One, you can go ahead and have the notification and credit monitoring provided for anybody that's been impacted by that breach. It also will provide you access to forensic services to determine what data was breached and who was affected, actually. And if your business is shut down for a period of time, you will have business interruption or dependent business interruption coverage to reimburse you for any lost income that results from that shutdown. The next one is I have coverage on another insurance policy. And this is a big one because I know many insurance agents add a small amount of privacy breach coverage on their business's GL policy. And there are pros and cons to doing this. Obviously, the pros are it's easy, it's quick, it's usually a very minimal premium to add this coverage. And often the carrier does not require an application, and most every risk qualifies, and the insured is provided some coverage, so an agent can feel like they're at least giving them something. But there are some really serious concerns too. Typically, it is only a very small sublimit, oftentimes 50,000 to up to 250,000 limit provided, and you're usually unable to purchase higher. Many of those endorsements change the claim trigger from an occurrence to a claims made and reported endorsement, which will limit the time in which an insured must notify the carrier of a breach event. Sometimes it's 30 days after discovery or by the end of the policy expiration, whichever is first. Many insureds may think the claim trigger is the same as it is on the GL policy and take their time filing a claim, which leads to a potential E&O or a denial of the claim due to the late reporting. These endorsements also have a lot more exclusions and are very restricted in the coverage. GL carriers normally do not provide any risk management services to their insureds, nor do the insureds have access to a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week cyber breach hotline like standalone markets provide. But more importantly, these endorsements do not extend normally to the business interruption, the data restoration, the cyber extortion, the cyber crime. It usually will not pay regulatory fines or penalties, or even the credit card industry fines and penalties if there's a credit card breach. So today we would just like to encourage everyone to take a look at these endorsements and read them and understand the limitations, and don't just take the easy way out. Do what's best for your customer. And if a standalone policy is best, get a quote and offer them that. The next one is we do not need cyber insurance. We invest in good security. And I will agree, having IT security in place is great. And that helps businesses to earn credits on their premium for a cyber policy. It's no different than a business receiving credits on their property policy by having video cameras or central station alarms. Cyber carriers provide credits when businesses have great IT security in place, which reduces their premium significantly. Also, having great security helps most cyber claims. Oh, I should back up. Also, it's to note that most cyber claims arise from human error, not because of lack of security. So losing your laptop or an employee clicking a phishing link can allow a cyber criminal access to your system. And Cyber threats continually are evolving and getting more sophisticated. Even large corporations who spend thousands and thousands of dollars, even maybe millions of dollars each year on IT security, routinely get hit. And just for a quick example, AT&T recently advised that they had a hack that actually took place with data back in 2022, and where tens of millions of AT&T cell phone customers and some non-AT&T customers were exposed in a massive data breach. AT&T said the information was comprised, including telephone numbers of nearly all of its cellular customers and customers of wireless providers that used their network between May of 2022 and October of 2022. And actually, the DOJ is looking into this breach now. Ticketmaster recently notified everybody of a breach back in May. User data was comprised of their actually occurred from their cloud service provider, Snowflake, and it impacted 560 million records. And this included personal order history, payment information, name, address, email. All this was leaked online and offered for sale by threat actors who infiltrated that system. It also included over 35,000 printed home tickets for upcoming concerts and events, in addition to 150,000 tickets and barcodes. Ticketmaster's Snowflake credentials were stolen by people with a very, very common malware tool that specializes in gathering and withdrawing sensitive data. Also, MGM had an incident that occurred back in September of 2023, and it was estimated to end up being about a $100 million claim. The hacker found employee information on LinkedIn and used that criteria to call their IT help desk. And in just a 10-minute phone call, they were able to gain access and administrative credentials to the MGM. Once inside, they locked down the system and demanded a ransom. MGM was forced to shut down their computer system across all its properties, preventing customers and retail guests from even using their electronic key cards to get into their rooms. Also, their Wi-Fi, ATMs, their electronic gaming systems, everything was shut down for a total of 10 days. Hackers were able to access 6 terabytes of data. When I speak to customers about purchasing cyber, I also keep in mind some of these recent cyber claims that are in the news. And it's one of the easiest ways and marketing tools I use to sell my product. And it's free. The final one is cyber coverage is too expensive. Cyber coverage really isn't that expensive when you compare the costs to what a business will have to pay out of pocket for the breach response costs alone. And just for an example, quickly, if you want to hire a breach attorney, most of those attorneys cost between $250 and $650 an hour and normally require a huge retainer up front. So they would pay that out of pocket if they did not have a cyber policy. Also, if you had to hire a forensic IT specialist, that can cost thousands of dollars. And they too want a large retainer up front before they start the process. And so start thinking in around the $10,000 range and up, depending. Then there's the legally mandated notification and credit monitoring costs. And they often say between $163 to $183 per individual to pay to notify them and to provide the credit monitoring. So if you consider a breach involving just 500 people that you need to provide notification and credit monitoring to, that would come up to about $81,000 out of pocket you would have to pay if you didn't have a cyber policy. And then if you have to hire a PR firm, those can cost starting at from $3,000 all the way up to $15,000, depending on the size and scope of the breach and how big the company is. So as you can see, all these costs can add up really quickly for a business. And we're only talking about the breach response aspect of the actual claim. There are so many other parts of a claim that could generate additional fees and legal expenses. So this brings me to how to protect your agency E&O. And I really do appreciate you guys taking time today. We want to talk about this coverage because we don't want your agency, of course, to experience the unfortunate experience of having to go through an E&O claim involving a cyber breach. But this is a very important coverage we should be offering. And we always want to let our customers know that higher limits are available or more robust coverage is available. Cyber premiums have actually been going down and it had really stabilized since COVID has ended. So this is, I think, a wonderful time to begin cross-selling this coverage. And I also say this because many years ago, there was an insurance agent that insured a small mom and pop restaurant. And the producer didn't want to offer cyber coverage to them because it was small and he didn't think they would pay the premium. But the restaurant ended up getting involved in quite a large credit card machine breach. And so as a result, the restaurant ended up suing the insurance agency for not offering them cyber coverage. That E&O policy ended up paying $1 million. So always offer this coverage. And if they don't want to purchase it, have them sign off rejecting it. Always let them know higher limits are available. So if you're only offering them a small limit, let them know higher limits are available. And also be very, very cautious about adding privacy breach on an endorsement on a GL policy or a D&O policy for that matter. And if you do this, please educate the insured on the claim triggers so they understand what the actual reporting contracts are so they won't end up on the late reporting. So that's all I have for you today. We are here to help you with this coverage. We do not expect you to know everything about cyber. That's why we're the experts in it. So I hope you will give us a call if you have any questions. And also, if there's any questions you have now, I know Megan will open up that chat line because I'd love to answer them here and now.
Yeah. We do. We've got a couple so far. One is, do cyber policies include coverage for additional insureds as a possible cyber threat?
Many policies now automatically include additional insureds if it's required by a contract. So I'm seeing more and more carriers that are automatically including them. You just need to check on each individual carrier to see. But yes, I'm seeing it more and more often.
Absolutely. And then we also had a question saying, will this webinar be offered on demand later? This is great info to refer back to. Yes, we will have this webinar as a recording that will be offered back later so that you can always come back to these and this incredible expertise that Kimberly shared with us. A couple more questions are, artificial intelligence is what they're referring to there for the AI.
Yes. I'm assuming they're asking, is there coverage for AI?
Yes.
And what I would say to you that I have seen at least 3 carriers in the last 2 or 3 months issue coverage addressing AI. And yes, they are covering it as a form of a cyber crime event. So if they're using deep fakes or voice activation to dupe somebody into transferring money or believing they are somebody or impersonating somebody, they are actually covering it. Now, I've only seen 3 carriers, but I am assuming that most carriers will probably in the next year add AI endorsements, so they are covering those exposures because it's a huge, huge issue.
Absolutely. And our last slide here that we have for you, everyone, is how to get a quote. So we have a digital application available on our website, which is www.chris-leaf.com underneath the applications header. That is a great way to get a quote because with just a few questions, we're going to be able to give you an indication. You can also download via our agent portal, The Grove, and afterwards we'll be sending out a follow-up email with both of those links available to you. And then, as Kim mentioned, our team of experts is always available to answer any of your questions, get you anything that you might need to help you get a quote. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and thank you for letting us take a few extra minutes at the end there to get with you. We will go ahead and stay in here just in case we have a few more questions come through the chat. But for everyone else, thank you again for joining us, and please be on the lookout for that follow-up email to your inbox. Have a good rest of the day, everyone.